This is Freddy Valencia, infamously known as the Monster of Montserrat. His crimes stunned Colombia. For years, women were going missing, but for the most part, it went unnoticed. This allowed Freddy to build something horrific, his own graveyard, where he lived above the very bodies he buried. He claims to have taken the lives of more than 100 women, yet even now he denies responsibility, begging for forgiveness he does not deserve. This man's disregard for human life is sickening. Even in death, his victims were subjected to further vile acts, and his crimes were only discovered when the stench of their remains became too strong to ignore. This case is sickening, and what's most sad about this one is that most of the victims are still unidentified. Because of the decomposition and partly due to their circumstances, authorities have no way of identifying most of the remains. I find this incredibly tragic. But before we dive in, if you find this video fascinating, then please drop it a like and leave me a comment below. And if you are new here, then please hit the subscribe button and consider following me on Instagram. It all really helps. Thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. Freddy Valencia was born on June 5, 1982, in Kennedy, a town in southern Bogota, Colombia. At first, his family life seemed normal. He lived with his mother, father, and sister. But even in nursery school, Freddy felt rejection. He was an intense, hyperactive youth, often irritating his classmates, and early on he began to struggle socially. At 6 years old, his life changed dramatically. His father abandoned the family for another woman, and from that moment on, Freddy never saw him again. This loss cut deeply, leaving him lonelier and more isolated than ever. In primary school, Freddy faced relentless bullying. Classmates mocked his appearance, calling him ugly and making up horrible names. The constant humiliation made him fall into depression and crushed his self-esteem. By this point, he had already begun to withdraw from others. Secondary school only reinforced the rejection. He later said that females were the harshest towards him, ridiculing his face and bulging stomach. Despite this, he performed well academically, excelling in mathematics and physical education. But one incident in PE marked a turning point. During class, a group of young females pulled down his shorts in front of everyone, exposing him. His peers erupted in laughter, mocking the size of his genitals. The humiliation burned him, and from that day forward, Freddy vowed never to be humiliated again. He became aggressive whenever he felt slighted, and a deep, consuming hatred for women began to take root. The bullying stopped, not because the taunts ended, but because everyone learned not to provoke him. When classmates found that teasing led to violence, they backed off. The school's headmaster urged his mother to enroll him into art and martial art classes to try and vent some of his frustrations in a positive way. His mother did act on this advice, and Freddy did very well in karate, and after 3 years he even became a black belt. But it didn't calm his hatred, it only gave him the tools to vent it even further. After school, he enrolled at Inca University to study industrial engineering. At first, things seemed to stabilize. He did well academically and even found a girlfriend and fell madly in love. But something was not right. He either was still not happy or he fell into the wrong crowd, but he began using substances. Quickly, his focus fell off, and so did his grades. He moved in with his girlfriend, then dropped out of education altogether after just 2 years. He then took a job selling car parts. This job sent him on long trips across the country. After he returned home from one of these trips, a neighbor told Freddie that while he'd been away, his girlfriend had been bringing other men back to their apartment. Freddie was crushed, and the relationship ended quickly, and with a broken heart, he spiraled even further into substance abuse, and then things got even worse. Shortly after, his mother passed away, and this was the final blow. Although by his own admission, he had not had a good relationship with his mother, it was still very hard to take. With her gone, he would later say that he had lost all meaning in life. By 2012, Freddie was 30 years old. He had lost his mother, his girlfriend, and his job. Now he was homeless, wandering the streets of Bazaar. To feed his growing dependence on substances, he turned to robbery and other petty crime. To survive, he picked through rubbish bins for scraps of food. Life had hit an all-time low for Freddie. While living on the streets, Freddie nearly died. He developed peritonitis, a dangerous swelling caused by a ruptured appendix or a hole in the bowel. He survived, but for a year, he was forced to wear a colostomy bag. The stench it gave off only deepened his shame and drove him further into isolation. Avoiding people entirely, Freddie wandered through the city until he reached Montserrat Hill, one of Bogota's most famous landmarks. Tourists rode cable cars up the mountain to take in the views of the city or visit the church at its peak. Freddie, however, climbed through the rough terrain on foot. It was there, on the hillside, that he decided to stay. On a patch of flat ground, he built a shack out of plastic, wood, and whatever waste materials he could find. For Freddie, it was the perfect place, hidden away from people, free to take substances alone, and safe from the rejection he feared. Authorities tore down the shack several times, but each time, Freddie rebuilt it. This hill was his home now, and it was here that something much darker was about to begin. Over time, Freddie stopped robbing and turned to recycling plastics to make a living. Once he recovered from his illness and no longer had to carry a colostomy bag, he slowly began to reintegrate into society. To some, he was seen as an honest, hard-working man, but others still kept their distance. They sensed the rage inside him, a rage that still surfaced whenever someone crossed him. Freddie would later describe himself as a very tidy man. Inside his shack, everything had its place. He hated disorder, and as he worked as a recycler, he slowly built up a nice home. And then he had an idea. Others in Bogota faced the same struggles as him, no roof over their heads or any safety. Freddie began renting out spaces near his shack, charging 5,000 pesos a night for homeless people and families to build their own makeshift shelters. It worked. He had created a small business, a landlord on the hillside, generating steady income. But this new life wasn't without issues. The people living on his land claimed he was aggressive, and at night they often heard him screaming to himself. Still, they were desperate, and they stayed. And then Freddie's thoughts turned darker. With his new income, he started visiting the Bronx and El Curcho, neighborhoods infamous for their substances and street workers. From there, he began bringing women back to his shack, usually between the ages of 22 and 30. He would offer them food, money, substances, and a place to stay. In return, he wanted, in his own words, just 5 minutes of pleasure. His shack soon filled with women's items that he had bought. Makeup, jewelry, and clothing, all used to barter with the women for what he wanted. And this is when the murder spree began. The women he brought back all had something in common. They all had substance abuse issues. Most of them were runaways who were not in touch with their families. Freddy would spend time with them first, learning just enough to decide one thing: if they vanished, would anyone come looking? The year was 2012, the point Freddy claimed the murders began, continuing up to 2015, but investigators believe it may have started years earlier, as far back as 2008. When women arrived at his shack, Freddy gave them gifts, food, substances, and everything he promised. If they gave him those 5 minutes of pleasure, they were allowed to leave freely. Nothing happened. But not all of them walked away. Freddy claimed some women only came to take from him, and that others knew he had valuables hidden in his shack and simply tried to rob him. And for those who crossed him, those were the ones he murdered. He bound them, he beat them, and though he never admitted it directly, it's likely he forced himself on them before ending their lives. He strangled some, stabbed others, and beat them to death. Only Freddy knows the true torment he put them women through, but it's clear he used his victims as an outlet for his rage. Once dead, he wrapped their remains in bin bags or towels. He then dug shallow graves just outside his shack. First, he laid a layer of stones. Then he placed the body inside, curled into a fetal position, and then covered it with another layer of stones. On top, he spread a carpet or any discarded fabric he could find, and finally, a mound of rubbish was placed on top. It was his way of trying to mask the smell of the rotting corpses, but the graves were never deep enough. The stench around his shack was putrid. Sometimes, when he was alone and aroused, Freddy admitted he dug up his victims' remains, abusing them even in death. Between 2012 and 2015, he claimed to have killed 18 women and buried them right outside his shack. 18 victims in only 3 years. A staggering number and an insight into just how far his depravity had gone. The people of Bazaar noticed the women were disappearing, but no one knew how. Street workers and the homeless watched friends vanish, but their voices were easy to ignore. Marginalized people don't always get heard. Some did suspect Freddy due to him being well known in the red light districts and being quite an odd guy with an aggressive nature. But some women did sleep with him and survived, and they vouched that he was no threat. But things began to unravel on the 22nd of November 2015. A family was looking for a place to stay, and this is when they met Freddy. They rented a shack from him on his land, and for a few days things were okay. But they had a dog who would not stop barking. It was always barking at Freddy's shack and trying to run over to it. Freddy was annoyed by this, probably fearing it could uncover his victims. He told the family, and quote, "If you can't control the dog, I'll kill it myself." This shocked the family, but they had nowhere else to go. They were desperate, so despite the altercation, they still remained in the shack, but now they felt something was not right. Then came November 28th. The couple were leaving their shack with the dog when it suddenly bolted straight towards Freddy's place. It began digging furiously, desperate, as if it already knew what was buried there. The woman rushed over, trying to grab the dog before Freddy could notice. Luckily, he wasn't home, but as she reached the spot, the first thing that hit her was the smell. It was putrid, overpowering. It made her feel sick. She called her husband over. The two of them stood there, realizing instantly that something was terribly wrong. They went straight to the authorities. Police arrived quickly, still with no sign of Freddy. They dug where the dog had scratched. Layer by layer, they unearthed the grave, and then they found something horrific. Wrapped in a blanket was a human leg, already decomposing. They stopped there. They didn't need to see the rest. The area was sealed off and a warrant was issued for Freddy's arrest. As they waited, officers searched his shack. Inside, the smell of death was even stronger. They found women's belongings, makeup, jewelry and clothes. They found buckets of drinking water. And then, beneath his mattress, they made the most horrifying discovery. Freddy had been sleeping directly above a grave. Through the gaps in the floorboards, they could see fingertips poking through the dirt. Now, this wasn't just a murder scene. The officers believed they were in the home of a serial killer. The very next day, Freddy was arrested in the Bronx. As officers apprehended him, they asked, "Do you live in Montserrat?" Freddy answered calmly, "Yes, I live there." Then the officers said, "We know what you did. Don't cause any trouble. We're opening the floor to your house now." At that point, Freddy lowered his head. His reply stunned the officers. "To be honest, I don't remember how many there are." Until then, police believed there were only 2 victims. Now, the scale of his crimes was potentially far bigger. They brought Freddy back to his shack and demanded he show them where the others were buried. Freddy pointed to a grid-like patch of land just outside his home. He told them 18 women were buried there. Excavation began, but only 11 bodies were recovered. Freddy claimed he couldn't remember where the rest were, but insisted they were close by. Later, he admitted he might have killed more than 100 women. As the remains were brought up from the earth, mothers of missing daughters gathered near the site, each one hoping, in the most heartbreaking way possible, that one of the bodies belonged to their daughter, so they could finally give her a proper burial. In custody, he spoke calmly, almost proudly. He said, "I treat them like a princess. I give them substances, booze, and sometimes gifts. But then they don't want to be with me. It makes me angry, and I strangle them." He insisted strangulation was all he did, but the remains of the bodies told a different story. Some victims had been bound, others shown signs of blunt force trauma or stab wounds, even bite marks. All of those women had been brutalized. The case exploded in the media. He was branded the Monster of Montserrat. Freddy hated the name. He shut down interviews and refused to speak to the police until the nickname stopped being used. In what would be his last media interview, he said, "I would like to ask you a huge favor. I don't know why I dislike the name Monster so much. I'm not a monster." He kept trying to twist the story. He claimed he only killed women who tried to rob from him, even framing some of the killings as self-defense. He begged for sympathy, but no one bought it. Everyone watching thought he sounded hollow. Of the 11 victims recovered, only 6 could be identified. The decomposition made it almost impossible to put names to the others. Among those identified was 30-year-old Adriana Patricia Porras Cruz. She had been struggling with substance abuse since she was 14. Her mother put her through rehabilitation programs, but she always relapsed. Another was Lara Saavedra. She wasn't homeless. She had 2 youths. She disappeared in February 2013 while trying to provide for her family. The other women who were named were Jessica Loren Uguero Patillo, Sandra Lucia Acosta Ramirez, Maria Rincon Munez, Sonia Yinef Martinez Uribe, and Lady Johanna Perella Benitez. In court, Freddy did everything he could to justify his actions. He talked about his difficult upbringing, his poverty, his betrayals. He painted himself as a victim, someone who was constantly excluded and ridiculed. To the cameras, he showed what looked like remorse, but at the same time, he lied about the brutality of his crimes, downplayed the violence, and tried to shift the blame. Any sincerity he showed, I don't believe, due to these contradictions. Freddie would have 2 trials and be sentenced to the murders of 2 of his known victims. Eventually, he would receive a 36-year sentence, which is extremely lenient considering his crimes, but this was partly due to evidence being obtained in the wrong manner and could not be presented in court. Also, there was a lack of DNA evidence linking him to the crimes. It is thought, though, before his release, more cases will eventually come to trial and his sentence will rightfully be greatly extended. The only person who really knows what happened to those poor women is Freddie himself, and whilst he is playing the victim, I don't think we will ever know the full truth. It's hard to comprehend that a man who admits to killing so many could even have the faintest hope of freedom, but somehow he does. And that to me is truly insane. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.